2013, Reclaim the Lanes, having paraded through local lanes in Newtown, descended on Sydney Park to celebrate its long history of events and free-spirited parties. 1,500 people and about 8 sound systems scattered around the brickworks and surrounding parklands, presenting a magical, colourful festival.
I really enjoyed reclaiming Sydney Park. Like, I was at the last ever rave that they had there before that all got smashed down, and I remember being there at the time in 1990 whatever, and it was really nice to be able to go back in a really joyous, playful way. You know, escorted by the police instead of, you know, fuck the police. It was really joyful to reclaim that park.
Sydney Park had an important role to play in the emergence of what became known as Doof.
An injury to one is an injury to all.
Here in the deepest depths of South Newtown is the temple of the Birth of Doof. This house, now ramshackled and broken down, will probably be turned into horrible units soon. It was this house. The German woman who lived in this house, now abandoned, next door to 600 King Street, where non-bossy posse were having a jam and where the music was going through the wall. And eventually she had enough of the repetitive beats at about 140 BPMs coming through this wall, and she made her way out of the front of the house next door to make that famous noise complaint.
What is this doof 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 all night long? This is not music.
The Birth of Doof was at 600 King Street on a balmy evening when Dee Dee was making way too much noise for poor Helga next door, who was trying to get an early night. And there was a knock at our door and no one did answer it for ages, and there was a lot more knocks until someone said, someone's at the door. And I went down and I was saying, sorry, it's someone's playing music. And she did say, what is this doof? And I said, what's what? What is this doof? Doof, doof, bloody doof, all bloody night, she says.
I remember the legendary Helga, her real name was Sonia, by the way, but you know, let it be known as Helga, you know, knocking on the door and you know, claiming, what is this doof?
We were all wordsmiths in 600 King Street. Everybody had a pun or a bit of vocabulary that became the next day's new word. And doof 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 within a week was what's famously become known as doof.
Storytelling and the way word travels is pretty rapid, and that expression doof could have travelled very quickly to very far, but it also you know, recognises the fact that doof is an onomatopoeia. It is a, you know, descriptive word of the sound itself, so it could spontaneously pop up all over the place.
The new steel pulse of motivational energy spurned on by all-night techno dance parties, environmental and social justice campaigns now had a name.
In the beginning, there was a Sydney pub scene. Which was heavily influenced by UK bands like Crass and Conflict.
Punk in the 70s, particularly mid to late 70s, was a DIY rebellion against the whole dinosaur, big corporate, big label, big stadium rock thing. And so bands started just playing really raw 3-chord sort of, you know, get up and do it sort of stuff.
Just look at, you know, the difference that the punk movement made to you know, to the way youth culture's evolved over the preceding generations to now, you know, and the way people have co-opted those DIY attitudes and stuff, and you can see it everywhere.
The ethos of punk was very DIY, and the whole trance, underground computer music, Atari, weird music that happened in the 80s was also of a DIY mentality that meant that people at home with home computers could make their own, music. They didn't have to go and suck up to labels and go to flash studios to put out music.
Early electronic music, there was a sense of creating a new reality, which punk opened the door for.
The ideology of anarchism and punk got transferred, and DIY culture got transferred and inspired by electronic music. So electronic music came in, and parties as a platform for political action was born.
The whole techno nomad, travelling nomad, reclaiming free space, doing parties, illegal parties, it was just a hop, skip and a jump from the politics of punk.
The Jellyhead sound system was available for free use in the community if you wanted to do a direct action, or if you wanted to make some noise in regards to something that mainstream media wasn't talking about.
And so there's a real philosophy, I think, of the whole movement of reclaiming space, because basically we were told we couldn't have any space, so we just went, well, screw you, we're going to take it.
Their eviction became almost street theatre, with commentary from above.
Who's the real vandal here, eh?
Jellyhead kind of started because we were sick of the scenes in the pubs, being alcohol and being really regulated, and not really, the culture couldn't express itself. And so the Jellyhead party started up.
So suddenly the Jellyhead punk nights had a DJ at the end of them, and then a DJ in the middle of them, and then fuck the punk bands, let's just have all DJs, and we'll have punk nights on Friday, and doof nights and fucking psychedelic nights on Saturday. And I don't think even the cops knew what the fuck was going on, honestly. It was very confusing, and yet it was beautiful, because it meant we were attracting tenfold of interest. And we'd have 300 people filling up Jellyheads on a Friday to punk bands, and then we'd have 300 people filling up Jellyheads on a Saturday with this new shit from overseas that was finding its way into the Australian underground.
And so we had these kind of weird new machines that came that produced wiggly, futuristic sounds that nobody had ever heard before. So the feeling that this Roland revolution in sound brought was a kind of trans-tribal transcendentalism.
And I think that's why people hooked into the whole Vibe Tribe thing. It was that sort of tribalism. And then after a time, the Jellyhead venue itself got shut down. But by now I think the movement had sort of realised this liberating thing that we could just reclaim space around the city of Sydney in order to do parties.
It was a really interesting concept to go in and take a space, turn it into a place of vibrant enjoyment and people getting together and sharing ideas, as well as having a terrific party.
Goa in India became influential in shaping the flavour of events in Australia in the early 90s. At Goa beach parties, cassette-playing DJs morphed from playing acid rock to electro sounds that pervade mystical, cosmic and spiritual vibes.
We were getting this music here in Goa, and people were into, mind expansion, psychotropic substances, dancing to sort of spacey, galactic, otherworldly music.
When I was in Goa, it was a rebirth in a way.
I met my partner at the time, Je. She had a European vibe and a travelling vibe, and I met her on the road. And suddenly we just heard that there was something going on. And this something was people travelling around the world, predominantly at this time, late 80s, early 90s. It was Goa in India. We went over to India, we had a small child, didn't let that stop us. The push or the pull was too much. So we dragged off a little baby to India just to discover what was going on, and happy to say never looked back. The child survived.
Growing up during the Vibe Tribe era, I guess, was chaotic. I don't remember a lot, I was quite young, but my parents were so wholeheartedly committed to their lifestyle that it wasn't really just a weekend thing. You know, I was there, I think, all of the time, every day, doing it with them.
And Goa for me was quite an experience. The energies of people coming together through dance music, electronic music, electronic body music. It's that sort of, collective spirit that really, to be part of, to experience, is a powerful force.
I ended up at the right place at the right time in Goa in the mid-80s, which was a underground seminal seed box of electronic psychedelia that became a diaspora. The feeling that we DJs had then in Goa was that we were like channeling this kind of new romantic neo-primitive pulsing rhythmic music for people to trance out to, and it wasn't geared around artists standing on a stage like in the rock days, and even perhaps in the industrial arty days, where you were putting on a show and you were on a stage and the focus was on you for a ritual. The ethos of the Summer of Love, in the 80s, early 90s was the love experience was in the center of the dance floor. The focus and the feeling was in the center of the dance floor. The focus was not up on a stage looking at personalities, artists, doing a show. That was a very big point. We felt this new music was galvanizing some new mysticism.
People were taking psychedelic drugs and dancing all night to this new style of electronic music that was completely in sync with shamanic practice and thought and consciousness, and yet the idea of it being illegal and it being made by people in the underground that didn't have record contracts and weren't signing record deals, and this early energy that was expanding consciousness.
The most empowering aspects of these parties, when they're really tuned well, is the communality, a sense of community, a melting of boundaries, a camaraderie where people feel a sense of bondedness, and it goes beyond language, and it's the sort of power of numbers, a collectivism, whatever kind of ideology you might want to pin to it, whether it's redemptive or whether it's emancipatory or it's a sort of feeling of mutual oppression.
This shit had to go back to Australia, and I always felt like I was the bearer of good news. Took it back to Australia, my experience, and incorporated it straight away into the Sydney scene. Whatever I was doing, whether it was wearing bloody mirror coat, Rajasthani goat herders coats from the northern parts of India, or whether it was convincing these leather-clad punk rockers that this new doof 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 160 BPM trance music was the way to go.
We are getting a lot of people who travel the world on the actual festival circuit, from the Summer of Love, England, through Europe and coming through India and Japan, and Australia was kind of the last stop. Byron Bay, was going on. You know, Space Tribe and Nick Taylor and Ray Castle.
I'd been living in Japan and travelling in Asia. I've been to Goa and Thailand, Koh Phangan, and partying there. And I was living in London making music. And then I moved to Australia in '94. And I've been, I guess, making what came to be known as psytrance when I was living in London. It was just around that time that they branded it. It became Goa trance and then psytrance. And then I moved over here and pretty much instantly became bored of that style because it had been branded and rules had been created and limitations had been placed on it.
So I arrived in Sydney after being on the Asia Trail and having these magnificent life-altering events with this music in Goa, which was a very international scene. And then I knew about Byron Bay and I was looking for a new beachhead. Politics was getting difficult in Goa. And of course I had friends in Sydney, and then I hooked up with Vibe Tribe people, but they had this urban politic, a sense of activism that was challenging political ideologies, the squat scene, artists that were challenging corporate values.
Of subculture, a clash of geographic cultures, a clash of lots of things, and that those sparks are what produce new revolutions and new ideas.
A lot of us moved into Vibe Tribe, and another subset of that same group moved into Electric Teepee, which was sort of running electronic music out of teepees. Party from memory, although I'm not sure how good my memory is from 20 odd years ago, was in Sydney Park, and we actually got away with that party and ran that party all night. And then after that we started throwing regular parties, and for some reason it just captured the imagination of the underground scene at the time.
Sydney in the early 90s was experiencing a creative explosion with this new love of technology used for dance floor audio joy. A myriad of groups emerged simultaneously around the country, too many to mention in this film. Some groups focused on social party energy like Vibe Tribe and Club Cookie, and others focused on the production of music like Clan Analog.
The real impetus to start Clan Analog was to open up live opportunities for electronic composers and performers, because everything seemed to be quite rocky at the time. It was purely a community-oriented objective to gather a critical mass of electronic producers and put on clubs or parties or whatever. Yeah, so Clan was on a DIY level, self-funding our own EPs. The first 4 releases of Clan Analog were vinyl records pressed around the corner here in St Peters. We started up a night at Bentley Bar.
As soon as there's some sort of unity from different angles and those cusps are felt and touched, you get that explosion of appeal.
Taking it out into the bush, taking it out into warehouses, illegal underground warehouses, that became exciting for me. Getting a date, finding a venue, finding a warehouse, finding a bush area, and that was, for me, that was the underground culture, and the music was being designed for that, because, you know, filtering through you know, Europe and England, the Summer of Love was kicking off, and that was, I just couldn't believe the spirit of it. I saw media reports coming through and hearing about it.
You know, in the Doof party era, that was the energy that came from it, and it was given by everyone to everyone.
The explosion of electronic music in Australia and its new arena of all-night dance parties grew and developed in different regions from the late 80s, each forming its own unique character dependent on local factors. In the early 90s, Australia had put its own stamp on this global cult. Positive vibrations of community co-created energy emanated from these events, subverting the dominant paradigm of our winner-takes-all competitive system.
First I asked, oh, who's the Vibe Tribe? And Jester said to me, whoever turns up at the party, it's a collective.
For me, I became aware of the Vibe Tribe crew. They were the anti-establishment, I guess, commercial organisation against sort of electronic popular rave music at the time. And that was great because you needed another force to keep everything in check.
Collective consciousness, creating a harmonic balance based around electronic music and the energy of that situation that we're all a part of at the same time and we're bonding in. You've
got to question things, because if you don't question what's going on, there is, you lose your liberties, you can lose your right, you can lose your freedom.
The temporary autonomous zone. And we all just wanted to make that not temporary, we wanted to make that permanent.
The feeling that I got from the first Vibe Tribe / Doof parties was that it felt like that it could change.
So you had your club music and you had your Horden music, but then now you had sort of more techno acid based breaks now, which is designed for the warehouse, designed for the open field, designed for the bush. I was one of the sort of the chief instigators of the Happy Valley parties and movement, Abel and I and his brother. And we did the first one in '91 in Wiseman's Ferry.
I mean, it was like Woodstock, it was like Woodstock. It really was. It was, the speakers and the scaffolding and the outdoors, and it really was a renegade event.
And because you're into something and because you give out things, you attract similar. So suddenly, we came into contact with Ming Darcy and Abel Polo.
That collective unconsciousness where we're all sort of thinking the same thing at the same time, and we're into the same music at the same time and had the same ideas. We felt that on the dance floor we could make the world a better place, and we did. I think we did. I think the world has evolved, and hopefully we've had a part in that.
Every Vibe Tribe party was just such an amazing vibe. Like I don't know any other thing that's been as consistently awesome as Vibe Tribe.
Core to the Vibe Tribe experience was this ethos of do it yourself as a political statement about power, about taking back power. We're not going to apply to the council to do something in a park. We're not going to jump through these endless hoops of ridiculous and horribly constrictive bureaucracies of public liability insurance, and you have to have 15 security guards, and your event has to happen in a venue that sells alcohol. We hated alcohol. We didn't want anything to do with alcohol. So instead, we did our things ourselves, taking personal responsibility for them. So we'd set up all that stuff ourselves, which is not an easy thing to do.
How can a group of 10, 20 people cause such panic around the city where armed policemen on horses have to turn up?
I think everybody who came through that period and at that time became touched with this idea that you can do things yourself rather than sitting around and waiting for someone else to do it.
This force that came through and that sort of made aware there is an alternative against, you got to smash the system, and that's totally part of progressing as humans and in protecting your rights as well.
I'd heard about anarcho-politics, but I was never particularly interested. I was more kind of like just solid left wing at that point. I mean, I'd read a lot and I was kind of very kind of politically, I guess, engaged, but I'd never come across, and all of a sudden, the way that people dealt with one another individually and as a collective, these kind of consensus-based decision-making processes, and a real conscious desire to think about how we lived and how to escape the patriarchy and smash capitalism, and how to express ourselves in ways that were new and different from the rest of the world out there.
Vibe Tribe, were the catalyst to many protests that stood up against the the government and wrongdoings by the establishment.
I was exposed to all these amazing ideas of you know, feminism and anarcho-politics and personal responsibility and how to, you know, police ourselves and how we shouldn't wait for others to do something we want and shouldn't rely on these corrupt institutions, but we should foment the change that we wanted ourselves.
Why it was so wonderful was because it really turned people on to politics, but in a fun way. It wasn't the serious politics and the aggressive politics, it was politics with fun. And even when the cops turn up or at parties, we used to come up with like little schemes to have fun with the police, so it was actually quite funny. Like for example, I don't know if you remember, but we were in Sydney Park and we had like this little doof going, and we had ourselves prepared for when the cops turn up, and at the time the cops would always say, well, we come in the name of the Sydney residents and they don't want you to do that. So we had a microphone and a spotlight, and when the cops turn up, we actually turned the spotlight onto the cops and gave a microphone out to the crowd and said, well, okay, everybody here are residents of New South Wales, so we'd like you to speak to them directly rather than to the DJ or to the organisers, because they obviously want this to happen. And it was a total success. People spoke up, people had fun, lots of laughter, and the police disappeared and we had the party.
And there was other parties we did, like at the Golden Ox, which was this little tiny sort of old restaurant that was pretty much abandoned, no longer being used as a restaurant. We threw a sort of bit of a private party, what we thought was going to be a private party for about 50 of us. We ended up with like 1,000 people turning up. It was way more than the venue could handle, and we all spilled out all over the intersection there in Redfern.
That was actually my first ever true Vibe Tribe party, was something at the Golden Ox. I think it was called Bollocks. It was, yeah, that was a spectacular event. Just with a couple of strobe lights and $5 entry, but it turns out to be one of the best nights ever.
But the parties were also seen as a way of experimenting with and of, you know, inculcating and also distributing this mentality and working with this mentality of do-it-yourself culture.
Revolution has to include all people.
No one was a spectator. You know, that was really important to us. It wasn't this spectator culture where you pay your $10 and you see something happen. It was you're a part of it. Which means if something goes wrong, it's on you as well as anyone else. So if a truck catches fire or a lead comes out of a light or all of a sudden there's no one to carry the water up the hill or whatever happens, whoever's around, fix it. Get into it. Just give a hand.
You know, that whole underground inner city political thing, we spent 3 or 4 years building up, 4 years building up to that point where we could travel 100 kilometres, 1,000 kilometres and do an event that doesn't get stopped. We were carrying that much energy with us and that much power over what we were doing that we were unstoppable. You know, we would party and we would be going in the morning. Wherever we were, whatever happened, whether it was burnt churches, riots with the cops, you know, whatever, 3 different venues, we'd be partying in the morning and there'd be 2,000 people there.
And it worked. And for a long time, these parties were these experimental playgrounds where everybody came and they had a role to play and they contributed. Someone bought 10 sushi rolls. Someone, you know, bought a couple of lights from their living room. Somebody bought a banner. You know, I'm going to come and I'm going to do this. I'm going to dress up at midnight and do this crazy little freaky show in the corner. I'm going to help by bringing the PA. I'm going to help load the PA. I'm going to help by doing this.
We managed to get hold of this venue, which was an ex-paintball warehouse that the guys at the paintball place let us use. And it still had all the props in it from paintball. It was like gigantic alphabet letters and all these kind of people standing around like looking kind of really grim, and these are all these props in this paintball warehouse, and this was probably the best party we ever set up in terms of having all these amazing props, and but hardly one came to it. Yeah. But I do remember
and Chuck played at that one.
Yeah, I do remember Chuck driving down the street because we were allowed to take the props if we wanted, so we decided to take the letters, the alphabet letters, which are like giant letters like this, the giant letter A and the giant letter T, and So we piled them on the back of Chuck's truck. He had an old Dodge, or really old Dodge truck. Piled them on the back of his truck, and we're driving down King Street, and all the letters started flying off and bouncing off down the street. Like a scene from some kind of weird punk episode of Sesame Street. It was hilarious. And we were all running up and down King Street trying to retrieve these giant foam letters that were bowling down the street and smacking people's cars.
I think I played Vibe Tribe Party Symbiosis, was it?
Graffiti Hall of Fame?
Yeah, the Graffiti Hall of Fame, not long after I'd moved to Byron. And that was my first experience of a Vibe Tribe party, and it was different from what I'd experienced up here and different from what I'd experienced in London, because it was more diverse musically for a start. It wasn't such a monoculture when it came to the music. It wasn't just trance or just techno, and it was wild.
I was probably about 15 or 16 years old when I first discovered Vibe Tribe and went to a party in Victoria Park, and the music was wicked, the people were freaky, and yeah, it was just the kind of thing I think I was looking for at that moment in my life, and I think I found I haven't changed it. This girl came up and gave me a flyer. She had bright blue hair and I think some fluoro overalls on, and she gave me a flyer for a party. It said Gate Crashes from Hell, and I was like, what's this? And she said, we're doing a protest in front of the Newtown police station, and we'll have a sound system and stuff, and all these people were DJing, and I was like, wicked, I'm coming. And I really think that was a pivotal moment in my imagination for things in the future, because people were sampling, like samples from the police coming, samples like from different stuff that had happened over the techno. So at the front of Newtown police station, the music was cranking and there was political samples coming over the music, and I guess that was where I really saw how music, especially that genre, could be used in protest, and how we could sample stuff and like get a message through the people, as well as having a wicked party at the same time.
For decent, affordable housing.
With the rave scene or the party scene, there was hordes and masses of young people meeting at these spots and enjoying themselves and exchanging and discussing new ideas. It was a chance to express yourself, express your opinions, meet other people, like-minded people, and talk about things. Now you can send a message, discussing a topic or some political, sort of ideology or where you stand or a comment, but there you had to actually physically meet in person to exchange ideas, to talk to each other, to bring things up, and that was part of that people movement. And the music was becoming, the bond, the thread that pushed people together.
Yeah, about half of them were probably legal venues which we properly hired, and about half of them were squatted venues because we couldn't find any other venue, so we just squat one. And it was totally unpredictable who would turn up or whether anyone would turn up. So as a result, we would sort of make enough money to throw the next party, and then the next party something disastrous would happen, like we lost an entire marquee one party.
Always travellers coming through. So Vibe Tribe kind of became this node on this global network of travellers and DJs and artists and just freaks and techno heads. So there's always another combi pulling out front and people bailing, can we just stay for 2 or 3 days until we go to Byron, So it became this incredibly fertile area for people to meet and to express ideas and to receive new ideas. The rate of iteration of ideas and creativity was incredible, because you were just with these people all the time, and there were always people coming and going to different places.
We had a moment when we were rolling with radicalness, and we were changing things, and we were making councils change policies and making police forces think about how they dealt with people, and that was what we were about.
So it was these exercises in collectivism that were amazing. They were just this incredible petri dish of a philosophy and a culture transmitted through big banging techno parties.
We did lots of different parties with lots of funny names. Tempo Tantrum at that warehouse in Pyrmont, which that started off as a party, that was hilarious. That started off as a party in Sydney Park and it got shut down before we even turned the sound system on. We got surrounded by police. The police tried to take the Jenny, which was a big 3-phase Jenny, and over our dead body were they going to take that because we would have owed a lot of money to the company we'd hired that from. So we managed to get the keys back off the cops after they took them off us to shut down that Jenny. And then this guy who happened to be there said, oh, I've got a warehouse in Pyrmont. So we moved all the party across to this warehouse in Pyrmont. We probably should have cottoned on to the fact that he didn't actually have anything to do with this warehouse when he had to break in for us to get in there. But which was still the penny didn't really drop. And we run this party at this warehouse. We only managed to get a couple of lights up in there and stuff because we'd moved the whole gig from Sydney Park, which we'd been setting up all day. And then we just in the middle of the night set up this party with about 2 lights and a big 3-phase Jenny in this warehouse in Pyrmont that it turned out this guy had nothing to do with and it wasn't actually his warehouse, but still like thousands of people came to this party. We were surrounded by the police all night who tried to shut it down but didn't manage to do it, and we made it right through to the morning. There was people coming out of there. There was a drumming room and there's all these drummers were in there, remember that? And they came out of there and their hands were bleeding and that was intense. And that was a chaotic party. That was probably the most chaotic party we ever did. That was huge and we practically did it in the dark. And the OH&S risks, when I think back on it, were just enormous. I can't believe we got away with it and nobody got hurt. And I think we got away with a lot of these parties because there was, the whole atmosphere was very sort of caring and sharing sort of atmosphere. People really looked out for each other. Everyone was looking after each other. Alcohol was really taboo back then, so there was very little alcohol at these parties. We went to Adelaide, we did a big gig down in Adelaide at the Fringe Festival, and we hired a whole warehouse down at Port Adelaide, a huge, expansive space, and hired a PA for that. And hardly anyone came to it, and we lost loads of money. And when we left Adelaide, we still owed the guy for the PA. It took us about another 2 years after that to raise the money from parties enough to pay that guy back. And I still remember the day we rang him up and said, we've got your money, we're going to send it across. And he could not believe it that we actually contacted him back in Adelaide 2 years later and said, we've got your money, where should we send it?
2 years previous to Vibe Tribe's ill-fated Adelaide experience, Imagineer, a group hailing from Melbourne, did a series of events at the Fringe Festival closer into town and hit the jackpot with big numbers.
I'm currently at Burning Man, which is why there's all this background noise going on. This is my installation here, the more drums. I went to Adelaide to pitch to see if we could be part of the Adelaide Fringe Festival in '92, beginning of '92. We went there and managed to, I got a 10,000 square foot warehouse in the Lion Arts Centre, and we ran a series of 4 parties there over consecutive weekends. We had 200 people at the first, 400 at the second, 800 at the third, and 2,000 at the last one.
Sometimes the parties would make some money, but then usually some disaster would happen and then we'd be in debt again, and so we sort of claw back enough money to pay back the debt and then do another party, and sort of went up and down like that, and it was absolute mayhem.
Sydney Park parties changed my life, really seriously changed my life. It was just an epiphany to come across. The first party I came across in Sydney Park, I remember being overwhelmed by this sense that just ran through me. It was like, this is it. It was like, I was just like, this is it. This is it.
Sydney Park with the 3 iconic chimneys. You can see it as you're coming into town. It's the start of the inner city culture happening there, and it's a big open space. The open space that used to be ground where they had circuses. There's an elephant buried in Sydney Park, then there was a brick pit there, then it was a rubbish dump, and now it's reclaimed as a park, and there's swans living in the pond, beautiful. But back then we were doing free parties there, and that's where the people came together to celebrate themselves and their culture.
Doing something on their own fruition is not doing any harm to anyone else, but someone up the top says no, they can't have fun.
The rave scene started to kick up, and the police were didn't know what to do with this. I guess they found it a threat, almost a threat to the establishment.
The free party honeymoon was short-lived. In April 1995, a Vibe Tribe free party in Sydney Park turned into a riot as police baton charged the dance floor.
So we weren't expecting anything like what happened on the night of Frequency, when the police came down in like a regimented military formation and moved in and just sought to bash the crap out of everyone they jammed into their formation. So they formed these like these wings around the party dancing and just moved in with their equipment and just bash, 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 and like took everyone down with it. So, and these people who were just out, you know, enjoying themselves and, you know, not ready for that kind of stuff. And then they tried to take down the sound, and then, you know, people were fighting back and all that sort of stuff. It was horrible.
The first many of the punters knew about it was when they were dancing and the police tried to bombard through the crowd, the dancing crowd, to get to the generators. Most people just kept dancing because, you know, it was their right to dance, and they just kept dancing, and then the police couldn't break through the crowd of people dancing and ended up just getting out their batons and was anyone hurt? Their way through and arresting people. Yeah, people were hurt.
I went to the last ever rave that they had there before that all got smashed down, and I remember being there at the time in 1990 whatever, and you know, there was girls being pulled out by the hair and people getting their heads smashed in and chucked into paddy wagons.
Party. I got arrested for smiling at a police officer. Can you believe that? That's what my crime was, smiling at a police officer. He grabbed me by the arms, half a dozen, I thought I was going to get beaten up, half a dozen chucked me in the bloody van, and now I can't even get the car. Because that cop just bashed my head into that.
That was a real shock, massive shock to see the police come in so organised.
Put on by collectives, you know, we are non-profit. Collective, we don't have hierarchy. The whole idea is to make space and music available and a vibe available for the people to come down for free and to enjoy themselves.
I don't make decisions, mate. I only carry out what I'm told to do. But you can just feel it here in your own what's happening.
A lot of people came together. Mobile phone network went crazy. Heaps of people came together. It was going off. It was big. It was really exciting, and everyone was having a great time.
You know, we weren't out fucking things up and smashing things up. It was a safe space, an autonomous zone, to you know, to a degree that we could control.
Unfortunately, the police didn't think it was such a good idea, and so they came there too.
We got surrounded by the police, and they were very hostile about this whole party and trying to shut it down.
Now, both sides hadn't really had a big sort of head-to-head before, and so the police didn't really know how to deal with these. A lot of people having a lot of fun.
In some ways, I think we just took the piss a bit much, and the cops just somehow had to try and rein the energy back in. Because if we'd just done that without any issue whatsoever, we would have been there a month later.
There was people still dancing while the cops were raiding it and not even knowing, because the sound was still going. They didn't know how to turn the sound off.
And the police came and rounded up a lot of us and illegally detained us, and so it was kind of also for a lot of people a lesson in how the system works or doesn't.
It was pretty funny because they couldn't figure out where the generator was and how it was plugged in, or where it was, and we had two Jennies going. We had like a backup Jenny, so they managed to find one Jenny and they got it unplugged, but then the music kept going, which absolutely mystified and infuriated them, and they could not find the source of the electricity for the music.
Frequency was just the authorities, the local authorities saying, hang on, you're taking the piss now.
I think it inspired a lot of people to stand up and make a bit of a statement about how things are, and more how they wanted things to be.
And then there was an ombudsman's report, and there was a community backlash against it, and the police were kind of in a bad position as well.
The image of police attacking people having fun and dancing is counterproductive for them.
There was a lot of young cops around Newtown at that time. I just felt that they didn't quite know how to handle the situation, which is what came out in the report afterwards. There was blame laid.
Both parties learnt a lot from it, and parties never proceeded that way in future, which is a good thing in a way, and tactics were developed on both sides, I'm sure, to nuance it and get more creative.
It's trying to get them to you know, see it your way and not be aggressive with them also.
At that point, we sort of reached a point where now the police were really aware of what these parties were. Like at the beginning, they didn't really get what was going on, and that made it really difficult for them to stop it from happening because they really couldn't figure out how it was all operating. But after that party, they really sort of became a lot more clued up on the whole thing, and it became increasingly difficult to get away with these parties.
And at a certain point, we found that we were kind of losing, as Vibe Tribe, we were kind of losing control of the narrative. And Vibe Tribe was really a victim of its own success.
But I think really what happened to Vibe Tribe in the end, when we ultimately we held a meeting to talk about the future of Vibe Tribe, and that's when we decided to disband it.
Because what happened was there was a lot of press around at the time. Every week we're in the paper with another ravers on drugs, South Sydney, and then Anna Woods died, and then the criminal justice bill in the UK, and then Vic Smith basically based his entire election campaign in this incredibly corrupt seat of South Sydney Council on there will be no more raves in South Sydney.
We were right on the brink of commercial success. We were starting to get, you know, thousands of people guaranteed to turn up to our parties. But the other thing is the crowd had really changed.
A few people have said to me over the years that they felt put off by Vibe Tribe because they didn't have a pierced nose, or they weren't into hanging off hooks, or they weren't into bongs, or they weren't into acid, or they weren't into doing illegal things. But they came and were completely blown away by the experience.
It had changed from being a very underground scene and become more mainstream. We were starting to get loads of, you know, young lads on Eki and sucking on their chuppa chups and with their baseball caps turned backwards and in their sort of uniform of white t-shirts and backwards baseball caps, and they weren't really underground and they didn't have that sort of political savvy that had driven us in the first place.
A lot of kids who didn't really know what the story was and were just coming to check out the freaks, and all of a sudden it was the spectacle. And people didn't get it anymore, and people weren't helping out, and it was just us working our asses off of this big thing that people were no longer starting to claim responsibility for. So the message was becoming lost in the spectacle.
So those of us who were ultimately originally motivated sort of by the politics of it and the reclaiming space kind of thing and the sort of building on the anarchist squatting scene, we felt like it had moved away from that. And even though it was the one time where we finally would have had commercial success and been able to make some money out of this whole thing, most of us felt like it had moved away from what the original vision was, and that's when we decided to fold Vibe Tribe, which was a difficult decision because a lot of people didn't want to go there. They wanted to keep going with it.
And we lived it and we experienced it to as far as we could take it. And then, come the mid-90s, when we realised that ceiling was reached and we weren't prepared to compromise.
After Vibe Tribe finished, there was a long period where we were expecting lots of other little crews who were trying to get traction. We expected them to fill the void. And disappointingly, that didn't really happen very much. There were some crews that did amazing stuff. There was Oms Not Bombs and there were Jungle Punks.
Jungle Punks was a techno crew, and it was pretty much just, you know, about techno, and as loud as we could get it and as big as we could get it and as hard and as fast. It was just rumbling, banging techno.
Drum machine, keyboard, and I went, that's it. Like, that's all I need now in my life. I just went, I'm making that fucking crazy alien music in my house, my bedroom, now on headphones, forever.
It would have been about 93. Jamie and I had hatched a plan that we were going to put on a party out in the Colo Valley. We lived out the Blue Mountains, sort of the back of Kurrajong.
I got asked to go along to a party called Anasazi, which was in a horse shed at Rainbow's End, which was in Kurrajong.
Let's take this whole sort of new inner city techno-y thing and just take it out bush.
2 shitty speakers which were just blasting, and a light that was just sort of flashing, and it was like an alien spaceship in the sky.
And we just fly the crap out of Sydney from Bondi to bloody Blacktown.
Alien music being spoken through a fan blades, you know, you speak through a fan. That was just that, and my mind was blown. I went, that's it. This is that powerful sound of the electronic music that I've been hearing, and it was doing the right thing.
Anasazi did pretty well, but nevertheless, half the people that went out looking for it got lost in the hills and didn't make it.
Probably my fondest memory of that was in the morning. It's a group of people that pretty much danced all night and had the time of their life, and before you knew it, all they wanted to do was help us clean up and help us pack down, and you know, that was pretty much the start of what a lot of us know as, you know, the Jungle Punks family.
And I'd found not just a family, but what I'd been looking for all my life. Something that didn't conform, had no control from the corporate world.
And it was amazing because it was a really cool community of just people that were out looking out for each other, helping each other out, and just really creative and doing amazing things.
Media's view of underground doofers is like, you know, a bunch of deadbeats, but I'd like to see a bunch of deadbeats put on one of those parties. Like, there's no way.
You know, we're a bunch of nerds, man. We're just a bunch of dorks from the suburbs that just like to ride skateboards and do our own thing. To create a space where, for those that felt that like...
Around 1995-96, partly due to the nanny state shutting down events, Sydney lost a lot of party people who relocated to northern New South Wales.
For some of us, 95, 96, we had children and we went to greener pastures and we moved up to the north coast and we moved up to Byron and did different things. You know, I set up a record label so that I could focus more on the soundtrack to the revolution.
The lush nature parties that we then went on to make up in Byron Bay here.
The connections that were made in India with the Space Tribe people, who then came to visit us at George Street in Redfern, brought that whole scene together. And then we started doing the bush parties up here, sort of Goa style, but it was still with the intention. It wasn't quite as political or multimedia as it used to be in Sydney, but it was a mixture of it, and there was still the ideology and spirituality that was connected to it, that was put through the parties.
The North Coast was it was a really interesting time back then, because it was a real coming together of people that had moved from Europe, travellers, as Jer was saying, that had been in Goa. So there was that factor, but then there was the people that had been here doing events for some time, Chimbindi, Jeddah, and a couple of other people, and then the Vibe Tribe connection from Sydney, and it all coalesced up here, and I think Beyond the Brain definitely brought all those things together. They were big multimedia events, but they were still very grassroots. There were no big headline acts necessarily. It was all done on a budget. It was people coming together and putting their creativity into it, whether it was making a sand mandala or doing a performance, or people hanging from hooks. Terence McKenna spoke at one of them.
The powers that be in northern New South Wales soon made it impossible for underground event organisers after a prolific period of epicentre and outdoor bush parties in the mid to late 90s. In Victoria and Melbourne, progressive and harm minimalisation approaches by councils and police allow bush parties like Earthcore and Rainbow Serpent to grow to mega proportions. In Sydney, a strong underground continued to develop despite its nanny state control. Sydney Park continued to be a place for legal and renegade music culture to set up. Since the Frequency riot, smaller sound systems and self-policed music shut-off times have managed to find the middle ground of keeping Sydney Park as a place where sound systems can be set up and coexist with joggers and dog walkers. Many party crews and DJs throw free parties down at Sydney Park.
Sydney Park, I think, now is really the bastion where all the alternative people and the art crowd and everyone can go and congregate and relax.
During the 90s and early noughties, South Sydney Council allowed and promoted community arts festivals in the park. Sydney Park became home to Sydney's Earth Dance event. The park has also become the host for Mascon festivals.
Sydney Park plays a really important part of the Doof culture as far as I understand, and especially within my own history. Adrian Black, who was one of the coordinators of the Mascon Festival, he asked me to come down and produce the first ever Doof stage at the Mascon Festival, which was a great success. We had DJs like Adrian played himself, Bass Bitch, a few others. Unfortunately the next year the administration changed and they didn't ask us to be involved anymore. So I just went, stuff that, do it myself. And I brought a sound system, and pretty big one as well, and had my own Renegade stage at the last ever Mascon festival. They weren't too impressed because the vast majority of the crowd gravitated towards what we were doing.
For me, Sydney Park serves like as a social oasis for people to come together and be able to just relax and, you know, take a load off their shoulders and just enjoy themselves without feeling that they're being governed over, that they have to watch their back, and they can just enjoy themselves, have a play, have a roll around on the grass, have a nice dance, and just create their own events in a pretty safe environment, and that's what I think it's really great for.
Sunday Dub Club is over 6 years old, having put on a reggae and dub sound system on the first Sunday of every month at the Brickworks, setting a precedent for good relations with rangers and police.
Sunday Dub Club, that's still going on now, and that's been going on for years. Unaffected by the cops. The cops came pretty soon, but they stopped coming after a couple of weeks, seeing there was no problem, so that's what we can deal with that.
Good music, doesn't go too late, anyone can come, you know, so I suppose it's just put out there to anyone, wide range of people. We often get people coming over from the park since it's been there saying, oh, we heard the music, came over, they come down next month and go, wow, we love it. I think it's just try and cater to everyone.
What I love about Dub Club is it's just such a great excuse for everybody just to relax, hang out, enjoy music, and to really catch up with friends. It's one of those scheduled events that everybody knows about, and if they can, they generally try to turn up.
In 2010, a mobile sound system convoy of wheelie bin sound systems and a skip sound system ventured into the park to celebrate May Day. The event was called Wheelie Amazing, a nod to the first Sydney Park party back in '93 called Amazing.
Okay, we're getting ready for Wheelie Amazing. It's just another hour, we'll be over there, just gathering our forces here, getting the bins together. I'm just going to play normal radio.
Hey, we're about to go to a wheelie bin free party. Over here, these bins are staying home.
Oh no, no rubbish.
This bin, this was one of the first coming out. What's the name of this one?
This one is the White Tiger.
White Tiger. We've got baseball over here. Baseball's on the way.
And just born today.
Just born today.
Oh really? What is it? It's the Rhino Blaster. And what's that? That's the original wheelie, yeah?
The idea was if the cops came, we just rolled somewhere else. I had the misfortune of being assaulted and arrested by police when they finally turned up to the resting place for this event that had already been moved on from another spot. I made the stupid decision to run from police that night. When they threatened to take me away for not having ID, I ended up with a fractured rib, an assault police and resist arrest charge. After lengthy court battles, I overturned my charges using the video evidence in this documentary.
Stop! He's not resisting!
Pull your arm out, brother. Pull your arm in.
Hey, you're hurting him! What are you doing?
Pull your arm in, mate.
Wait, don't hurt him!
He's not doing anything.
What are you doing?
Step off, mate.
No, you're
resisting. Step off.
Why did you say
I hit someone?
I didn't try and fight you. I never assaulted you!
Oh, bullshit, mate.
I never did!
You assaulted me. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I never assaulted you.
I get this fucking.
solution. It has to include all people.